All right, boys and girls, it's time for the 3 R's. We are on page 442 in your textbook, and we're going to add composting to the list of the 3 R's. All right, why do we talk about this? Well, listen, there's only 3 ways, really, that we can control the MSW, that we can control the output. We can reduce the amount of garbage in the first place. In other words, less things go in your trash can. Think about what's in your trash can. Think of ways you can reduce it. There aren't all that many, are there? Maybe composting. Most of your trash is paper, so you could always burn it in the fireplace, but that's not real efficient. No, I think the best way that you can reduce your garbage is to think about the source of that garbage. And that's called source reduction. In other words, you're buying things that have a lot of packaging that you have to throw out. Think about what's in your kitchen garbage can right now. Or wherever your garbage can is. The source products that you buy have a lot of packaging. So even if I could convince you to buy 2 less shirts because the wrapping increases the MSW problem in our country, that might not necessarily help because you still have wrappings to deal with the couple of shirts that you do buy. So one way to deal with this is to buy shirts that don't come with a lot of wrapping. And it is true that there are companies today that are trying very hard to decrease the amount of MSW they are initiating. Remind me to tell you my TV story tomorrow in class, or whatever the next day of class is here. So we can reduce the amount of MSW at the source. We can also just use less materials in the first place. Don't buy 5 shirts when 3 will do, and then you won't have that extra trash in the first place. Now, this is a new idea. You need to write it down. You need to understand this. It's on the ACE exam and the AP exam. It's called Service Flow Society. And here is the best way for you to write this down in your notes. Buy services, not things. And again, I don't want to take up a lot of time on this video giving you great examples, but I've got some. In class next time, remind me to tell you the Xerox story. Very interesting story of a major copier company. And I'll just whet your appetite by explaining to you, they used to be in the business of selling copiers. And they realized that their old copiers were ending up in junkyards and they were ending up in landfills, and they didn't want to be a company known for increasing our garbage problem. So they changed their whole approach. Instead of being a company that sells copiers, they became a company that sells document copying services. There's a big difference, a big philosophical difference that I'll explain in class tomorrow. You can decrease the planned obsolescence. Anybody know what that phrase means? Planned obsolescence? This might amaze you to realize it, or maybe you have realized it all along. Most things that you buy are designed to crap out on you. They're designed to break down. It's planned that it will become obsolete, that the current model will no longer be any good. Well, guess what? That is a company admitting that they hope that their stuff breaks down and ends up at the landfill. So we can decrease that concept. And again, one way to do that is to think of selling services and not things. And then one last way to reduce the garbage in the first place is make things easier to service. We live in a throwaway society today. There is no doubt about it. There are things that we throw out today. It just blows me away. I can't imagine, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, throwing away some of the things that we just pitch today. We don't ever get things fixed anymore. I had one of my flat screen TVs that's out on my back porch. It died on me about this time last year, and I was looking into getting it repaired. It cost more to repair than buy a new one. That's nuts. That is not making things easier to service. That's making things harder to service. They'd rather you buy a new one. And of course, what happens to your old one? Ends up in the scrap heap. Ends up at the landfill. So we've got to find ways to make things easier to service, and that way they'll last longer, and we won't have to make so many new ones, and we won't have as many of them in the landfill. Okay, that's reduce. Everybody understands the idea. Reduce the source. Reduce the stuff in the first place, and you won't have garbage to take to the landfill. All right. Another way that we can decrease the amount of garbage at the landfill is to reuse things over and over again. Every time you reuse something, you keep from having to throw it out. And here's the reuse things. It extends the resource supplies. Remember, here's the example I like to use. I actually reuse plastic bottles. And there's actually an advisory against doing that. But if you throw out, every time you use bottled water and you throw that plastic bottle out, even if you recycle it, you're requiring us to go out and now make a new plastic bottle. And do you know what plastic uses a lot of in its manufacture? Oil. We need that for transportation. So if you reuse something, you extend the resource supplies. Whatever resources are required that go into that product, you're extending the amount of that by reusing something. It maintains high quality matter. Do you remember way back in chapter 3, we discussed the difference between low quality matter and high quality matter. That is to say, when you make something from raw materials once, that's high quality matter. But when you take that new thing and you break it down and make something else out of it, you degrade the quality of the matter to the point where it becomes low. So if you reuse something, it maintains high quality matter. Here's a great example of it. The old Coke bottles back in the day. I'm sure I've told you the story about what it was like when I was in high school when you got a soda from a vending machine. It came in what was called a returnable bottle. You didn't throw out the bottle when you were done. It was thick, heavy glass. It was high quality matter. Now think about the bottles that you buy soft drinks in today. Plastic. That is low quality matter. So when you make something so it's reusable, it's going to be higher quality. And when it has to be thrown out and sent to the scrap heap, it's going to become low quality after that. And reusing reduces energy usage. All right, it takes a lot of energy to make that plastic bottle that your Coke is in. But if you used a refillable beverage bottle, yes, it takes some energy to use. Again, don't get me wrong. Back in the day, those Coke bottles had to go back to the factory. They had to be steam cleaned, and then they had to be refilled and recapped. So there was energy involved when we reused those Coke bottles. But still, that is less energy than is required to make a new bottle, whether it's plastic or glass. And here's another idea that's come along. The great example of reuse that you can think of is right there at your supermarket. Grocery bags. Have you noticed this in our culture here in Florida? We've just gotten to the point now where we're encouraging people to reuse their shopping bags. Buy cloth bags, and then you don't have to worry about paper or plastic. And you're reusing a bag over and over again instead of the requirement of making new plastic bags or new paper bags every time you go to the grocery store. That is a fantastic example of reuse. You need to have examples like that at your beck and call when asked on the AP or the ACE exam. Those grocery bags are a great idea. By the way, the time will come when paper or plastic won't even be available to you in the grocery stores. Because I think I've mentioned to you before, California has been doing this grocery bag thing for 30 years now. We're just starting it in the last 5 years or so. And California has gotten to the point now where there are no paper or plastic. You better come in with your canvas grocery bag. And everybody does, because they know the deal. They know that there's not going to be paper or plastic. They know they're being forced to reuse, and they're all right with it. That's the reuse story. The recycle story is quite a bit more complicated. And I would encourage you to think about some different ways that recycling happens in our country. Maybe you visited an aunt, a grandmother, or some other family member in another state. Come to class tomorrow to discuss different ways you've heard of to make recycling happen. Here where we live, they make it super easy for us to recycle. You put everything in one bin, you don't have to separate anything, and they just take it all. They use prisoners up at the Rosemary Hill landfill. They have a large warehouse thing there with a conveyor belt, and these large trucks come in with all the recycles. They dump them on a conveyor belt, and they use prisoners to separate the recycles. So we don't have to go through the rigmarole, but there are other states that really put it on the consumer, really put it on you, the burden of separating your recycles. So if you know any stories from other states about recycling, bring them to class. There's two types of recycling, and this is guaranteed to be on the ACE and AP exams. You need to know the difference between primary recycling or closed-looped, same thing, closed-looped recycling, and secondary recycling. And it's a simple definition, but learn it now. Primary or closed-loop recycling is when whatever it is you're recycling is turned into exactly the same thing again. That not all recycling works that way. You know, aluminum cans are a great example of primary recycling. Aluminum cans get all bound up together, we melt them, and we turn them back into aluminum so that they can be turned back into new aluminum cans. That's closed loop system. Secondary recycling or open loop recycling is quite a bit different. That's when one product is recycled and it's turned into something completely different. There's lots of stories about this. People, especially manufacturing, that are trying to use new items as the source material for their product. The example that they use in the book is there are several companies now, because everybody needs heavy winter coats, especially up north, where companies are actually taking plastic bottles, and those plastic bottles are being recycled and they're being turned into the materials to make fleece jackets. So those are the two different types of recycling. I love this graphic here. This graph here is showing you how much energy it takes to do the different types of recycling. And it really lets you know between the 3 R's what the best thing is to do. It still takes, 32,000 kilocalories. It still takes a lot of energy when you use an aluminum can once. That's assuming it never gets recycled. That's a lot of energy to make a can. Here's how much energy it takes to make a steel can. Not as much as aluminum. Surprising. You would think steel, that would be like the cans that you buy your vegetables in. Aluminum can is like the can that you buy your soft drinks in. Okay? You would think steel is a harder substance, would actually take less energy to make, more energy to make. It actually takes less. Okay, so now when you recycle the steel can, notice there's still energy that's used in the process of recycling a steel can, but not nearly as much as if you used a steel can once. And then here's the amount of energy for a glass drink bottle. It takes a lot less energy to make glass than it does to make aluminum or steel. So that would be something good for you to do right off the bat. Buy products that are sold in glass versus aluminum or steel. And then here's the amount of energy for recycled aluminum, recycled glass, and then here's the refillable drink bottle. Now you can see that takes practically none. I have to tell you guys something. You're going to be going off to college next year. A lot of colleges don't hardly even bother with recycling anymore. And do you know why? Because this is what they do. You will see kids all over campus carrying their own refillable drink bottle. And they'll put anything in it. Water, soft drinks, iced tea, whatever. They're putting all sorts of things in that refillable drink bottle because that uses the least energy of all. This is the absolute best thing for the environment that you can do. Just use refillable bottles. No energy is required to recycle that. You buy it once and you're filling it over and over and over again. Okay, this diagram's in your book. I don't need to go into it. It's just showing you the difference between open loop and closed loop. With open loop, whatever it is you are recycling is turned into something else. And you can see in this case, you've got the plastic bottle. It's called PET. It's a type of plastic. And that bottle you use, you recycle it. It goes to the landfill for recycling. Then it gets some more processing happens. Some more raw materials have to be added. But when we decrease that plastic down to shards, then we can use it for something like a jacket. With closed loop recycling, whatever you started out with, it comes back as the same thing. Carpet fibers can get recycled. This is a big thing nowadays, by the way. We can recycle carpet. We can grind it down and turn it, that carpet that you don't want anymore can be ground down, turned back into fiber, and then made into another carpet again. Closed looped. Maybe you haven't thought of all the different things that make recycling a good idea. Take a look at them. Just about every environmental issue that we have covered so far this year can be lessened if you would recycle. And this is why recycling is such a popular thing to do. And we'll see statistics in a minute. Americans are recycling. And that's fantastic. And I hope when you go off and you set up your own little household, whether it's a dorm room or an apartment, you will continue to recycle like your parents do. And if your parents don't, well, that's their choice. But recycling is a great thing. Especially here in Florida, it's easy to do. It reduces air pollution, obviously, because now much less things have to come out of smokestacks. You don't have to make a new water bottle because you're recycling that water bottle. It saves energy. It reduces urban air pollution, acid deposition, all these things we just talked about. The CO2 that gets released into the air, reducing climate change. But here's some other great things. It reduces the amount of solid waste disposal, which is why we're covering it in this chapter. Requires less demand on minerals. We don't need as many raw materials because we don't need as many plastic bottles because we're recycling them. Reduces the amount of water pollution, which we just covered a couple chapters ago. And remember, almost always, you can make the case that habitat destruction is one of the answers. So if you ever get asked, what's the benefits of recycling? You can say, reduces habitat destruction. You better be able to explain what you mean by that. And what you mean by that is less mining has to happen to make aluminum, for instance. And that protects species. Just about every environmental issue we've discussed is on here. About the only one I can think of that isn't on here is soil degradation. You know, overusing soil in a farming context. These are the different ways that we recycle in the United States. I wanted to just mention some, but I think we'll save that for class. You do need to know this acronym, and MRF is a mixed recycling facility, and that's usually how we do it here in the United States. But that facility has to do something about separating the recycles, because paper cannot be with steel, which cannot be with aluminum, which cannot be with plastic. So the recycling has to be separated, and that's done a lot of different ways. In the U.S., we are doing our part with recycling, and you can see, look at here, 1985. 1985 was not that long ago. It may seem like a long time ago to you, but that's when things really started to boom. Look at the increase in recycling. We are pretty good about this. You don't have to be a Nazi about it. You don't have to go running around chastising people every time they put their soda can in the regular trash. But certainly, if you're always mindful of trying to find a recycle bin, you're going to do well. Both in terms of total MSW recycled and what percent of our MSW gets recycled. Impressive increases. That is a big move upwards. Alright, so here's what we're doing here in the United States. 40% of the aluminum is recycled in the United States. That is very impressive. And that's good, because where do we get our aluminum from? Mountains. We have to mine it. We've already discussed all of the habitat destruction, all of the energy used by the trucks and the equipment, and all of the water that has to be used in the mining process. And that uses over 90% fewer resources. Paper, we do a very good job with recycling of paper. And we can take that and literally melt it down. We add water and it melts in the water, disintegrates, and then we can take that back to the paper mill. The difference between pre-consumer and post-consumer recycling is easy. A lot of paper that's made at the paper mill, those materials can be reused, recycled, and that's called pre-consumer recycling. Before it ever gets to you, paper mills are doing some recycling. And post-consumer recycling is what you do at your house when you put your newspapers in the recycle bin, for instance. And here's the sad, sad story. Plastics take a lot of energy to make things out of plastic, and we are not being very successful at recycling plastic. Only 10% of the plastic is being recycled. That means 90% of it is ending up at the landfill. And we will cover the problems that are associated with that happening in another video. In the next video, as a matter of fact. One last concept for you. And that one last concept is composting. Perhaps some of you have a compost pile in your yard, And the idea is a simple one. Let's take everything that's organic, your old orange peels, the food that's left over and stuff like that, and let's put it in a pile in the backyard and let it just sit there and rot. Rotting, decomposing, organic material becomes something that's an organic rich fertilizer eventually. And that's something we can all use around the house, certainly when it comes to farming, and but around your house when it comes to your gardening. Instead of having to spend money to buy more Black Cow or whatever kind of nutrient-rich soil your garden needs, why not compost? And in a matter of months, your garbage will be something that you can use in your garden. There are some negatives to this. A lot of people don't like to do this. It can become smelly, but you can purchase systems that are perfectly designed for residential usage. Certain containers, and these containers even add a certain amount of microorganisms to help you with the breakdown process. Composting is very popular. Once again, big thing in California. If you want to do it on a large scale, it's available. There are actually cities in California that do every bit as much composting as they do recycling. That is to say, how we have trucks that pick it up and we take it to the landfill and we separate it and then we send it to this company and that company? Well, in California, they do the same thing. They have an investment of the trucks that spend the money to pick up the organic material, and then they separate it and they work it through processing. And of course, this takes up a lot of land. Don't get me wrong, but this is things that end up in large compost piles, great big ones, and then it's sold. And it can be transported to stores so that you can buy it. But in California, this is where people go to get their fertilizers, especially in farming communities. For instance, in the wine region, this is where they get a lot of their fertilizers. It's other people's garbage that's been allowed to sit and ferment, break down, stink, whatever you want to call it. But it's allowed to ferment for a while. It's allowed to sit for months and months and months. And what gets left at the end of all that is something that's very, very usable in your garden. So this is a large-scale operation, and it's provided by the town. It's part of your taxes usually. Okay, I think that's everything I want to talk about when it comes to composting. Those are your 3 R's. I know this is longer than you would like, but the next video, we're going to talk about the 2 ways that we deal with our garbage. We either bury it or we burn it. Late.